We are gathered here to address what is certainly one of the main topics in today's meetings in New York, and I would say for the entire week of the ministerial week of this UNGA 71, and that is the movement of people, migration, but also the issue of refugees. We know this is a complex reality. We also know it requires global solutions, and that is why we decided to organize this event, and we're very glad that you could all make it today. I will introduce our four speakers. One is still on her way, and then after they introduce the point, because we are all too busy, we'll leave you with my good friend and colleague Stefan Manservisi, who is the Director General for Development or Cooperation at the European Commission, to reply to your questions and comments and to further elaborate on some of the initiatives that both High Representative Mogherini and Vice President Georgieva will talk to you about. So again, thank you again, Excellencies, colleagues, dear friends. You are most welcome to the EU delegation. So let me introduce the three speakers for the moment. First of all, High Representative for Foreign Policy and Security, Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Federica Mogherini. Happens also to be my boss, so most welcome to New York. The Vice President of the European Commission as well. Another Vice President of the European Commission, Kristalina Georgieva, in charge of budget and human resources. Welcome to New York again. Planning and International Cooperation of Jordan, Mr. Imad Fakhoury. Welcome.
Pleasure.
To New York as well. And we are waiting for the Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs of Kenya, Mrs. Dr. Amina Mohammed. She told us that she's on her way, so we look forward to welcoming her very soon. So without further ado, and thanking the speakers for coming today, I will pass the floor to Mrs. Mogherini, and then the sequence will flow with Mrs. Georgieva and Minister Fakhoury. So again, thank you very much for coming. Mr. Mogherini, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'd rather stand so I see you all. Is that okay for you? Maybe it's a bit more formal, but it's a bit better for me to be able to look into your eyes, even if I'm not you, but it's okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming. I think this shows the interest that is there, not only on the issue of the day and of the week, how to manage migration and the refugee flows, but mainly how to deal with the root causes of this phenomenon, but also a big attention on how the European Union is working on this. So let me start from the very beginning by saying that finally, and we wouldn't have been in the condition of saying the same last year, but finally we're turning visions into actions. We are starting to do the things and not only to plan what we will be doing in the future. So I would say, first news, the European Union is well on track, finally, to tackle this phenomenon properly. And first of all, it is doing so, we are doing so, with our friends and partners in the world. Here we have, well, for the moment, one great friend and partner representing Jordan, a country with whom we are doing a lot and a lot of positive things. And another one, Kenya, is going to join us together with other countries in Africa. We're developing partnerships to manage the root causes of migration. I believe it is very important for all of us, first of all, that the issue of migration and forced displacement is at the center of this year's General Assembly. We have developed in the last year the policy of partnerships and compacts. It's good to see that at the UN level the same kind of approach of building partnerships is carried to the different level, to the new stage which is of building global partnerships. That is what we need. We have, I think, somehow a new global awareness, finally, an understanding that migration can only be dealt with as a global issue, and that we have a duty, a responsibility to invest in this new awareness and in our partnership. There are forces around the world, in Europe, also here in the United States, who believe that migration is a fight between the North and the South, the East and the West, the richer countries and the developing ones. This is not our approach. The European Union believes in partnerships. We believe that human mobility, first of all, has always existed in mankind history. We are ourselves the result of mankind, of this mankind experience of human mobility. We believe that human mobility can bring about great opportunities, but this can only happen if we work together with shared responsibilities and with common solutions. If we look at the demographics, it's very clear a continent like Europe needs migration. And believe me, and I'm sure you believe me, every time that I say these words in Europe, it's a political issue. Still, I believe it is completely necessary for us to face the truth. The demographic trends bring Europe to this reality. We need migration, but we want and need it to be safe, legal, voluntary, and well managed. And this will make this common effort sustainable, and both on the European side and in the rest of the world. So we see a massive room for win-win solutions. Also because if you look at the Mediterranean and Africa, you see a huge untapped potential. There are youth, young people with excellent degrees, very good studies, and no job opportunities for the future. A lot of goodwill. And they are simply trying to find their space in the future. Actually, this is happening also in Europe, but this is another story. There are also firms and businesses in Europe that are very much willing to invest and expand their businesses in countries that present huge potential and opportunities. But they are faced with instability, lack of infrastructures, in some cases security risks, and in most cases are prevented from investing in places that are considered as high risk, which are also the places that need investments the most, fragile states. So we have a huge potential in terms of human capital, in terms of natural resources, that is held back by poverty, by the lack of infrastructures, by serious governance challenges, by corruption, and in some cases by conflict and war. All these issues are issues that we want to tackle, and we are trying to pass the message to our public opinion. I believe here we have a space, we have a window of opportunity, that doing so is our interest as well. It is the interest of our partner countries in the Mediterranean and in Africa. The European Union is already by far the largest donor when it comes to humanitarian aid, when it comes to development aid. Kristalina knows quite a lot about that. We are also the first global actor on development aid. This year only, the European institutions, not including member states, have committed 4.7 billion euros to address migration and refugee crisis. Every time that I mention numbers, but Kristalina is much better than me in this, every time I mention numbers, I feel the numbers are never giving the magnitude of what we're doing, for two reasons. First is that if we aggregate the numbers that the European Union is investing, both in the Mediterranean region, in the Syria-related crisis, or in Africa, you get to huge numbers. In the Syria-related crisis, we have invested so far more than 6.2 billion euros. When it comes to Africa, it's almost impossible to get the total amount of money that both from development, humanitarian, I'm sure Kristalina has the right amount, we invest every year. This to say that we are doing more than anybody else in the world to face the challenges in Africa and in our region. But this is not enough. And this is why we're presenting today this external investment plan. Because we know that it is time for the private sector to join. Our public funds, even these huge public funds, will never be enough if we want to eradicate poverty, meet all the sustainable development goals, and tackle the challenges of today's world. We need an innovative new idea to come into life. It is not the only thing we are doing in terms of innovative approach. We're also working on the migration compacts. This is not for today, it's for a different thing, but we are turning also in that respect partnerships with key African countries, starting with 5, Niger, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Mali, and Senegal, turning facts, ideas into reality of partnership and cooperation to manage migration together. But here, what we're presenting is an external investment plan of the European Union that will allow European firms and also African and Mediterranean firms to expand their businesses and offer job opportunities. Already, they are doing that, because European firms already are creating hundreds of thousands of jobs all around our neighborhood. And let me tell you, wherever I meet European entrepreneurs abroad, especially in Africa and in the Mediterranean, they tell me one thing: help us invest more in this country. Help us creating the conditions for our businesses to grow more in these countries, because we see that there is a huge potential out there. And whenever I talk to our friends in governments in these countries, they tell us, help us to attract more investments, because this is what we need. So we saw that there was a space to match two different aspirations, two different needs that would be the perfect win-win approach. We need to get the private sector on board, and especially to be able to operate in the fragile countries that need investments the most, and where doing business is more difficult than anywhere else. So this means that we need to accompany these businesses, these firms, into this complicated but very useful journeys. So what we will do, then I will obviously leave also to Kristalina the space for explaining exactly things that are far too complicated for me to dig in. But what we will do is that mobilizing European funds, we will provide a guarantee for investments in fragile areas and with specific policy targets. The plan will engage in areas crucial for sustainable development and to help building more resilient societies, because we often focus, especially on conflict areas, on the strong men that can win a war, but we too little concentrate on the strong societies that can win the peace, which is much more difficult. And this is what the European Union can do. With this plan, we are putting into action, so it's not words, it's actions, the commitments of the Sustainable Development Goals, of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, and also of COP21. Interventions will cover sustainable infrastructures, agriculture, with specifically on young people, because we know that the demographic trend, especially in Africa and in the Mediterranean, is clear. We have to address that part of societies that is also the biggest potential of our area. And it is also a way of not only managing migratory flows, in some cases preventing dramatic journeys across the desert or across the sea, but it is also a way of preventing radicalization and potentially terrorism and criminal organizations. So we are investing 3.35 billion euros to leverage some 44 billion euros, that makes approximately $50 billion, in investments in Africa and in our neighborhoods. This is more than the European Union is investing currently on development aid worldwide. And as you know, we are the first donor worldwide. So what we're talking about is something huge, never done before, that can change indeed the way in which we make development policies in Africa and in the Mediterranean. But the plan will not simply give financial support and financial guarantees. Usually investors are not only concerned with the financial risks, but also with the environment, with the business environment they're operating in, with the different justice systems, with the technical uncertainties of the local context, the corruption, of course, the security situation. So what we will do is also to use our delegations, our embassies, our ambassadors in all these countries to accompany these investments and these investors and provide them support on the ground. And our political dialogues will help improve also the overall business environment in the countries where we will operate. In this way, indirectly improving and attracting even more investments. And let me say that a special role will need to be played by small and medium enterprises that not only in Europe but also in these countries can play a significant role in terms of job creation. So it's not only the economic power that we have that we're putting at the disposal of development goals, but also and especially poverty reduction and also economic development, economic growth in Europe. It's the mix, unique mix of tools that the European Union has. The economic power, the development aid, the diplomatic power we have, the technical competence that we can put at disposal of these actors, and also our role as a global security provider, because in many of these regions we also have a presence on the ground tackling the issue of security sector reform and security. So let me say to conclude, and I'm sorry I've been too long, first of all, this is really the EU added value at its best. There is not only one single member state of the European Union that alone can do something like that. I would say there is no country in the world alone that can do something like that. And it is the smart thing to do, because it's investing in investments, it's investing in entrepreneurship, it's investing in partnerships, it's investing in the future and the present, investing on Africa, the Mediterranean, in the young people of our region. Because, yes, this is a news maybe for some Europeans, Africa and the Mediterranean is indeed our region. So let me conclude by saying that we believe this approach can be revolutionary. And we count on our partners, but also on our member states. I see many ministers here in the room, and I would like to thank them for this. To match this commitment with concrete acts that could help us doubling the effect of the investment plan. And let me say that we count very much on our partners in the Mediterranean, in Africa, to make this visionary but pragmatic and realistic plan work, because indeed the European experience tells us very clearly, and I understand this is also something that is mentioned here in the United States in these weeks and months. Indeed, we believe we are stronger together and we can solve problems only together. Thank you.
I will follow Federica, being able to see you and let you see me. Good afternoon, everybody. Minister Hakuri here knows me from the days I was humanitarian commissioner. And in these days, I would always despair that needs for development investments and humanitarian aid are growing exponentially, and funding has a hard time to catch up. And then, with luck, I became Commissioner for Budget, so I can do something about it. And I have done it. I'm going to make 3 points today. First, place this external investment plan in the context of our overall European approach to development. Second, bring a bit the history of how we developed something similar for inside Europe, how it works, and the lessons we draw. And then third, a little bit more on the details, what we are aiming for, how it is going to be achieved. So our development context. I will start with the question, how many of you in this audience think that in 2015 the EU spent less money for development aid than in 2014? Anybody? Let me see. Anybody thinking that because of our trouble at home we have gone down on our commitments to development? This is a fabulous audience. You're very well informed. Of course we didn't. In fact, there was fear that this would happen, that Europe, under the pressure of domestic economic hardships and migration refugee crisis, will step down on its commitment towards people in trouble. And instead, we actually increased by 15%, from 59 to 68 billion euros what we fund in development cooperation, 15% more at the time of great difficulty. And I'm very proud to say that we in the European Commission have beaten this by 2 times. We have increased by 30%. Why we are doing it? Because we are convinced more today than we were even before that investment in development is morally right, but it is also in our own interest. It is investment in stability and security for all, including for the European people. And in that context, we felt that we have to continue with this, strive to do more. I see some of the some ministers from new member states, and very pleased to see that new member states in Europe are also increasing their contribution. But we also recognize in Europe that even if we double and triple development cooperation funds, this is not going to be enough to create the opportunities and jobs that a growing population in our neighborhood and all over the world require. That unless we bring private sector investments on a scale, unless we learn to use our development money as a magnet from private investment, we ain't gonna make it in terms of sustainable large-scale impact. And that comes my second point. We actually have an investment deficit in Europe as well. During the crisis since 2007, our investments have melted as proportionate share of GDP. We have a shortage that is in the order of 300 to 400 billion. I see President Hoyer here. So, and at the same time, we in Europe and the world as a whole are facing a very strange problem. There is plenty of liquidity in the financial system. Tons of money sleeping deep in the financial systems of Europe and the world. So how to wake up this sleeping money and make it work for our people? We have created the European Fund for Strategic Investments. President Hoyer is our fabulous partner. Mr. Hoyer, get up. People have to see you. This is because this is actually one of the quiet miracles we have done in the last years. We have taken a small amount from the European budget, a small slice. Actually, it is 8 billion, potentially to be 16 if necessary. But with this money and 5 billion from the European Investment Bank, we have generated a draw-in potential of 315 billion euros. And what is fabulous is that in 1 year of operation, this European Fund for Strategic Investment has delivered already close to 120 billion fresh investments in Europe. And what is even more fabulous is our biggest success is with SMEs. And we know that small and medium-sized enterprises are those that create jobs and make our economy work better. And of course, that is what we want to replicate in our neighborhood. We want to take the lesson from the European Fund for Strategic Investment, which is, it works provided that the guarantee is large enough to give comfort to private sector to invest, that it is combined with strong advisory assistance service so people can figure out how to tap into this resource, and that we also take care of what President Hoyer calls red tape, that we clean up the obstacles to investors to do so. And that takes me to my third point. This is exactly what we are aiming to do with the new facility, the new fund for external investments, by combining the power of the European budget, a small slice, as Federica said, we are talking about slightly over 3.5 billion, and make this money to be potent enough to draw in private investments on a scale to 44 billion, much more if our member states have the bravery to join. And by the way, in the European Fund for Strategic Investments, the so-called Juncker Plan in Europe, our member states came in. They walked their conviction that this is really good. So I'm absolutely on the view that we need to make them walk this conviction also for external investments. Where the critical part of implementation would lie, it would be in making good use of experience we already have to leverage our money for private investments to flow. For example, in Africa, we have an Africa Infrastructure Fund that has granted around 660 million euros in blending instruments to buy down interest rates to make it easier from a private sector perspective to invest, and we got a very healthy 1 to 14 leverage impact of this money. 1 euro brings 14 euros from private sector in. I'm on the view that our success would indeed depend, as Federica said, on how quickly we build the capacity for identification of projects and advice on also cleaning up the red tape that, Minister, exists everywhere. Jordan is not immune. You have a little bit of this, as you have been telling us there. My conclusion on what we are doing today is that we have a unique chance to prove that we can create an environment that benefits mostly the younger generation, the small businesses in developing countries in our neighborhood, but also that benefits stabilization in countries that have been suffering from fragility either of their own or coming from their neighbors. And if we are successful, we would see, as with our Juncker plan, we would see money flowing very fast. So to put us under the gun, I'm inviting you next year, this time around, to take stock as to how far we have gone. And it better be a long mile. Thank you.